If you're trying to understand how off-road suspension works on your Ford Bronco and you're thinking about lifting your Bronco, this is going to be the video that you need to watch. We're going to break down everything that you need to know. We're going to break down how the front and the rear suspension system works from the factory. Then we're going to even explain the most common types of lift kits and exactly what they do and what you should be watching out for. Now, whether you're brand new to suspension systems or you're just wanting a better understanding overall before you make an upgrade, this is going to make this very simple for you. Now, we're covering a lot in this video, so there's going to be some timestamps down below. You can jump around to the section that is most important to you, but I will say that the information in this video is so good, you're not going to want to skip anything. So now let's go ahead and jump straight into how does the front end suspension system work on the new Ford Bronco. Now, for reference, this video is going to be completely about the Ford Bronco, but a lot of this information is probably cross-referenceable with the F-150 and a couple of other similar vehicles, but not so much so for like things like the F-250, a vehicle that has got a solid front axle. And that leads me into my first thing about the new Ford Bronco 2025 and newer, is it has an independent front suspension system. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, I've talked about the independent front suspension system. What is that compared to a solid front axle? Well, an independent suspension system basically means that the front tires can move independently of the other tire. That's where that word comes from. A solid front axle basically means you have both tires and one solid axle that connects them too. So that way, if you hit a pothole really, really hard over here, you're going to feel it on this tire too. But an independent front suspension system works completely different. You hit the pothole over here, this tire can move. This tire may or may not move depending on how bad the pothole is or how big the little hill or the rock is if you're off-roading. So the independent front suspension system is designed for a better on-road handling characteristics, which is very interesting because the Bronco is designed for off-road. Well, I personally, and I know I'm biased because Town & Country Ford and TC Customs, we do primarily everything with Ford and Ford Bronco and all that kind of stuff. So I know that I'm biased, but I think Ford hit the perfect balance for a daily driver, but also off-road capability. Now, why do I say that? Well, the independent front suspension system is much better for on-road driving characteristics because you've got everything is more compact, everything's more tight. The alignment is much more precise. You can literally take your hand off the steering wheel on my Ford Bronco Raptor on 40s and drive as straight as the the interstate will actually take you. And so the fact that you can do that on a set of 40s in a Bronco is pretty wild to me. I would love to see you do that in a Jeep because a lot of the Jeep people that might be watching this video, it's a much better off-road capable vehicle with a solid front axle because it's more flexible. The suspension flexes more. We'll get into that in just a second. But the downside of that is you're constantly sawing the steering wheel back and forth just to stay straight in the lane. The other side of a solid front axle is death wobble. That's not something fun if you've ever had that happen to you. That's a known characteristic of a solid front axle. So getting back to the front axle, independent suspension system works like this. You basically have the wheels are connected to a steering knuckle. Okay, that steering knuckle is what allows the tires to turn in the front from left to right, right? That's what that is. But that steering knuckle kind of works like a shoulder, meaning the steering knuckle can go up and down, but it can also turn from left to right. That's what that steering knuckle is. I want you to think of that as your, the ball joint is going to be the actual shoulder itself, but the steering knuckle can go up and down, it can turn left and right. But what is the steering knuckle connected to? Well, it's connected to an upper control arm and a lower control arm. And in both of those situations, those are mounted to the vehicle or the vehicle's frame, a solid mounting point inside the vehicle itself. On the Ford Bronco, it is a very solid because I've hit plenty of potholes and it can take a beating. I mean, you can jump these Ford Broncos. Yes, ask me how I know. Yes, you can. But at the end of the day, you have the upper control arm, the lower control arm. That's what moves up and down for the suspension. And you might be asking yourself, okay, so I know how the steering knuckle turns. I know how the suspension moves up and down. How does it actually steer? Well, the steering knuckle is connected to a steering rack, which basically moves back and forth, it's connected by something called a tie rod. The tie rod is that little piece of metal that connects that steering knuckle to the steering rack, and the steering rack is basically connected to your steering wheel. So that way you input something into the steering wheel, the steering rack moves, and it moves the tie rod, which moves the steering knuckle. I feel like I'm all over the place, but hopefully that made a little bit of sense. And that is going to be one of the biggest weak points of the front suspension system of the Ford Bronco, is going to be those tie rods up front. Why is that? Well, the second you start lifting it and putting it on 40s, you're putting a lot of extra stress if you're going to be off-roading that vehicle incorrectly. Now, I will say that I've never had a tie rod snap, and I've had 2 Ford Broncos on 37s, and I've had 1 on 40s. The main thing that most people screw up with is they try to horsepower it out when they shouldn't be. And then the other time I see issues with tie rod snapping is usually when they're using the front differential in a situation they don't need to be using the front differential, meaning like they got the front locker locked and then they start turning everything gets bound up, and that's usually what ends up happening. But if you are smart in your off-roading situation, you will almost never have an issue unless you're just absolutely abusing it. So that's a little bit on the front end of the suspension. Now, there's one more caveat that I've got to throw in with the independent front suspension. If you go with a Badlands trim level, you pick up something called the stay bar disconnect. Some people call it a sway bar disconnect. Some people call it a stabilizer bar disconnect, but it's all the same thing. There is a bar that is connecting one side of the suspension all the way over to the other side from the driver to the passenger, and that bar is literally there to stabilize the vehicle from rolling, okay? That's bad when you're on the interstate. You don't want that vehicle to roll. But when you're off-roading, you want that to not be there, so that way now the suspension can articulate even more. Because at the end of the day, if you can keep all 4 tires planted on the ground, that means you have more traction. And how do you get all 4 tires on the ground? Well, it'd be awesome if you could just press a button and that stabilizer bar disconnects, loosens up, and now all of a sudden you have a lot more room, a lot more flex in that front suspension. And that's what the stabilizer bar disconnect is. That only comes available, I believe, on the Badlands. The Strobe Edition may have it. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know that on the 2025, the Bronco Badlands is going to be the telltale sign of, do you have the stabilizer bar disconnect? Does everybody need this particular part option? Not necessarily. Is it cool to have? Absolutely. If you can afford it, it's fun to have. Now let's talk a little bit more about the rear suspension, and then I'm going to get into more of what can you expect out of the different trim levels and the different packages that you can get from the factory on the suspension system of the Ford Bronco. So in the rear suspension, it is a solid rear axle, and I think that's the perfect combination. You got the independent front. It's going to be good for steering, and you don't have death wobble, but you have a little bit more let's say robustness for the rear axle, because it is a solid, there's fewer moving pieces. Yeah, it's not going to be as good of a ride quality, but I would argue most of your ride quality comes in the feeling of the front end. And so by putting a solid rear axle out here, you can get a little bit more structural rigidity. You can get more suspension flex. And I would argue you can probably tow a little bit more with that rear solid axle anyway. So at the end of the day, you have this tube, call it an axle, that connects the passenger from the driver rear tires, and that is a solid rear axle. And that is connected with a coilover setup. Basically means that you have a shock absorber that is, looks like this, and you have a coil that is wrapped around that shock absorber. That's where the coil is over the shock. That's basically where that name comes from. But the problem is that coilover can only compress, smaller, bigger, smaller, bigger. What keeps that rear axle from sliding out of the vehicle the first time you hit a bump? Well, there's going to be some trailing arms in that vehicle. So you have upper and lower trailing arms, which are designed for basically keeping the axle from front to back right where it needs to be. So that's nice. But you also have one other bar that runs from the passenger side to the driver's side that connects the vehicle's body to the actual rear axle that keeps the axle centered from left to right. When you have all 5 of those bars mixed in together, the axle's locked in where it needs to be, but it still gives it the ability to flex that rear axle without having to worry about the drivability. I think it's a really good combination between those two. Now that you've got the overview of how the front and the rear suspension system works, let's talk a little bit more about what suspension systems are available on the Ford Bronco. And then after that, we're going to get into the lift kit options for you. It's important that you know all of this information all the way through. So if you have a base model with no Sasquatch package, basically you say, hey, I want a 4-door base model, no options. That means you have the Haas 1.0. That is a telltale sign that if you have a Bronco with black shock absorbers, you have a Haas 1.0. That's the base shock. There's nothing fancy to it. It's a good little setup, but it could stand to be upgraded if you're going to be high-speed off-roading in that vehicle. But for daily driver, there's nothing wrong with it. Now, if you said, hey, I want to upgrade to a Badlands, or I want to upgrade to a vehicle with the Sasquatch package built into it, you're going to automatically pick up the Haas 2.0 suspension system. The way that you can tell that, if you don't know, is look at that same shock absorber, and instead of it being black, it'll be bright yellow, and you'll also see a separate reservoir tube off to the side of that. That is a position-sensitive damper made by Bilstein. That is who Ford has contracted for that specific shock absorber. It's a great shock absorber. I've had that on one of my vehicles. On the other one, I actually replaced it with a coilover system, an aftermarket FabTech kit. But I digress. Let's keep focused on this one specific thing, the Haas 2.0. So you have those upgraded coilovers in the front and the rear. Now, depending on if you get the Sasquatch package, they're going to be different lengths. So if you just get a Badlands, it's got a specific length for a specific ride height. But if you go with the Sasquatch, it's like an extra ½ inch taller than it would be if it was just the normal Badlands. So just something to kind of think about. Now, we're not going to get into the details of what you get when you get the Haas 4.0, but I want to talk about the Haas 3.0. Haas 3.0 is something that comes available on the Badlands, and it is an option on top of the Badlands with the Sasquatch package. So if you say, hey, I want a Badlands, I want the Sasquatch package, I also want to upgrade to the Haas 3.0, this is their brand new Fox coilover system, which is going to be the best of the best unless you upgrade to a Bronco Raptor, which has got position-sensitive upgraded Fox coilovers. Now, my recommendation is if you're going to be modifying the suspension at all, do not get the Fox coilovers in the Haas 3.0 or get the Bronco Raptor, unless you're just crazy like me and you just want a truck on 40s, then that would be a great way to do that. But if you're going non-Bronco Raptor, just going for the normal Bronco, and you say, you know what, I'm going to put a nice expensive coilover system on it, I might not do the Fox coilovers because you're kind of throwing money away at that point. They're great coilovers. You just don't want to pay extra and then turn around and throw those coilovers away, because it really, at the end of the day, that's the only difference in there. Now, a side note, sidebar for you, if you do pick up a Badlands, whether it's a Sasquatch package or not, you do pick up an upgraded steering rack, which is beefed up for bigger tires and off-roading capability, and you pick up the Ford Performance tie rods, which are also beefed up, basically taking care of the main and only weak point of the Ford Bronco in most of the situations. So just kind of think that if you're going to go with a big old lift kit, you might want to upgrade to a Badlands for that specific reason alone. Now let's talk about the suspension modifications you can do on your Ford Bronco. Now, all of these suspension components I'm about to mention to you are available for purchase on tccustoms.com, shameless plug, but I do want to lay this out in a way that even if you wanted to buy these and install them yourself, or have some of the professionals like TC Customs actually install these for you, we want you to understand how this works, even if you don't buy something from us, if that makes any sense. So what I've done for you is I've brought props, and I'm going to basically break out these suspension systems for the sake of trying to understand and make it available to everybody, make sure everybody understands it, is I'm going to break it into a good, better, and a best situation, as cheesy as that sounds. So this is going to be the most basic version of a lift kit that you can find for the Broncos specifically. And you'll notice that I've basically got 4 different pucks. These are spacers that basically go between the strut itself, the coilover that we talked about from the factory. You basically take that coilover out of the vehicle, then you would take this strut and you would basically bolt it to the top of the strut, then you would put that coilover or strut back into the vehicle, and it basically pushes the entire suspension system down a little bit further, creating you more lift. Now, are you going to be creating more performance out of your suspension system with this? Maybe, maybe not. The biggest performance upgrade you're going to be able to get is larger tires will fit, which means better traction. But you're not going to be able to speed through the desert at a faster rate with this suspension system, because you're quite literally just reusing the suspension system that you already have. Now, the crazy thing is this type of a suspension system is actually good for, I would argue, 60, 70% of the people that are going to be lifting their Ford Bronco. Most people are not going to be bombing through the desert or going to be doing something crazy that they need the extra performance out of their suspension system. But this is a great option if you're wanting to start somewhere, because you can always upgrade this at a later date and time. Why do I say that? Well, let me show you the next component that I've got. This is an aftermarket upper control arm, and as you can probably tell, this thing is pretty dadgum large. Now, we've already mentioned to you, this is the component that allows the wheel to go up and down. Well, what you can do is you can upgrade to something like this Zone Off-Road lift kit, which gives you a little bit more lift. But the problem with that is then you've got, all of a sudden, you've got your ball joint is at a crazy angle unless you swap out something like this with the upper control arm. By swapping out the upper control arm, this upper control arm is designed for angles that are made with the lift kit. And so it kind of helps get everything a little bit closer to factory geometry with the front suspension system, and it's going to give you a little bit better of a ride quality. So something that you might want to consider if you're wanting to not just do the good, but you want to do slightly better as far as the suspension is concerned on the Bronco, this is what you would want to do. And so, yeah, this ball joint is going to be at a much better angle if you do a larger lift kit. Now, if you do a 2-inch lift or a 1-inch lift on a Bronco, you don't need an upper control arm. But if you're going to do the 4-inch lift kit, or I think it's a 3-inch lift kit, depending on how your vehicle is equipped, whether it's Sasquatch or not Sasquatch, you're definitely going to want to go with this upper control arm to keep everything a little bit better of a ride quality. Now, do you get any better performance out of this one? I would argue, just like the other lift kit, the smaller lift kit, you're not going to pick up much of a performance increase with this, because at the end of the day, once again, you're just pushing everything down a little bit further, and it allows you to drive the vehicle without absolutely hating your life while it's, you know, riding on bricks. It doesn't do that. It does keep a pretty nice factory-like ride with something like this, a Zone Off-Road lift kit or a FabTech lift kit. There's a lot of great options on the market. This just happens to be the one that I had to show you today. So what are some of the benefits of this middle of the road lift kit? I would argue you can go even bigger on tires. You can go even bigger on the lift kit. You're going to not have as accelerated of a wear in the front end with the ball joint because it's at a better angle. And so that's a nice benefit. The downside to it, once again, is that you're not going to be getting a crazy increase in performance. But the good news is this system is not going to exactly break the bank. That's the reason these first two options are fantastic, is because they're a good bit less expensive. Oh, my legs tell me otherwise. And here is the last component. I'm surprised I didn't blow my back out with this thing, but basically this is the Mac Daddy of them all. This is going to be an aftermarket upgraded coilover suspension system. Now, this one happens to be a Dirt Logic coilover, which is actually made by FabTech Motorsports. I've got a lot of good friends that work over there, good people, and all of their stuff is made here in America. Absolutely love it. But what I like about this is take a look at how big the shaft is on the shock absorber. Just realized I might have been saying some inappropriate things. Anyways, the shaft of the shock absorber, okay? And then you also have the body of the coilover itself right here. Notice how thick, okay. Stop it. Get some help. Notice how thick the body of the coilover is, the actual shock itself. Now, why is that important when you're going with a high performance upgrade system like this FabTech? Well, at the end of the day, the more body you have here, the more fluid you can fill inside of the shock absorber. The more fluid you can put in there, the less chance it's going to get overheated, wear down faster, and basically you can bomb through the desert at a significantly higher speed. And if the body of the shock was not providing you enough fluid, this one has what they call a remote reservoir, meaning that they have a remotely mounted reservoir of extra fluid over here. By the way, all of this is pressurized, but all of this is filled up with extra fluid that allows you to, the fluid can get hot in here, but if it gets hot, that's okay. It can come out into this extra reservoir and cool off if it needs to. So it's a pretty cool setup that FabTech gives you. Once again, there's a lot of different companies out there that give you a coilover option. This is just by far my favorite on the FabTech for the Bronco is going to be the FabTech coilover system. Now, a coilover system just like this also includes upper control arms, but I don't have those to display for this lift kit for right here because as you saw earlier, this was everything I had. I've got a bad back, so I'm sticking by that. But anyways, I love the FabTech coilover system because not only do you get upgraded performance, but you also get adjustable ride heights. So do you see this little collar right here? You're going to notice there's going to be holes in there. You can grab a spanner wrench and spin this thing around. And if you spin it around on these threads located right here, you actually can increase the amount of height by pushing the shaft down or reduce the amount of height by changing the coilover and basically shrinking the whole thing. And so it's nice that you're not only getting a performance upgrade, but you're also getting the ability to infinitely adjust the suspension exactly where it sits, which is great if you're going to be doing something with a lot of payload, maybe a rooftop tent, or you're just bombing through the desert and need a little extra clearance. You've got that control located right here. This is going to be the option if you want to go through the desert at high speed or you want to increase your flex on the suspension system. In my previous Bronco, the FabTech coilover system actually gave me both. I was able to go faster off-road. I was able to suspension flex it out a lot better. To me, this is as good as it gets, which is good because you pick up a ton of performance and flexibility options. The downside is your wallet might not like you as much, but you get what you pay for. Another key factor with upgrading to a coilover, yes, it is expensive, but the benefit to you is that you can actually have this thing revalved from FabTech for free one time up front. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, not every single coilover manufacturer is the same way, but FabTech is, and I did verify that before I actually made this video. So the way that FabTech valves these suspension systems for the coilovers specifically is the perfect way to do it for like 98% of the customers that are actually installing it. But if you're one of those 1 or 2% of the customers that say, hey, no, I need something seriously higher valved, or I need it, revalved, make it a lot softer, or whatever the situation is, FabTech, you send them your coilover, they'll revalve it for you once for free automatically. Once again, 98% of the people don't need that, but it's really cool that FabTech gives you that for free automatically. Well, I guess you're paying for it with a coilover, but it's nice that they give you that customization that is available for valving of the shock itself in addition to the overall height. This thing truly is completely customizable. Next up, let's talk about something that's important regardless of what lift kit you select, and that's going to be warranty. Now, there's so many rumors out there that say, well, this warranty is going to void, this thing is going to void my warranty, or how do I warranty? Well, there's a couple of different things. We can make a dedicated video on this alone, but let me basically boil it down to you this way. Only use a lift kit from a reputable manufacturer, somebody like FabTech, BDS, those big name brand companies. And then at the bottom of the website, most of them, like FabTech, will have a supplemental warranty that is good for the vehicle, just like the rest of the vehicle is. So let me word it this way. Let's say that I install this coilover lift kit on my Ford Bronco, and I have something that is like the engine goes out. And my local Ford dealer says, oh, that's the reason the engine went out is because you added a lift kit and tires to it. Well, if you've registered for that warranty, which is 100% free in a lot of these situations. FabTech and BDS is one of them for sure. They come with a supplemental 5-year 60 powertrain warranty that covers the vehicle in the case that the lift kit voids the warranty from Ford. So the idea there is you take your car into the shop for the engine gone out. They say, oh, no. Ford's not going to pay for this warranty because you added a lift kit, which has absolutely nothing to do with the actual engine failure at all. But in that situation, FabTech and their lawyers would step in and take care of the warranty concern that you're having, since Ford has technically denied it. So that's one of the reasons that TC Customs is able to offer vehicles like this and not void that warranty, because that 5-year 60 powertrain supplemental warranty from companies like FabTech, BDS, and so on and so forth. And so with that being said, let's talk about 3 tips that whether you're going to be doing a lift kit like this one, or you're going to be stepping into a good, better, it doesn't matter which lift kit, these next 3 tips are going to be important no matter who you are and which suspension system you're going to be selecting. Number 1, you must get an alignment immediately afterwards. In fact, I would recommend you get this thing installed at the same place that you're going to have the alignment done. Why? Because sometimes when you are dropping all of the suspension out and doing all of this kind of stuff, the alignment is so far off, you can actually break something if you're not careful. Now, if you're halfway competent, you might be able to get it halfway right enough to get you straight to the alignment shop. But my recommendation is don't drive that dude at all until you can get it fully and completely aligned. The next thing that you need to know if you're going to be lifting your vehicle is all of these Broncos come with automatic emergency braking. Most of them come with lane centering, if not all of them, or lane keeping, or whatever they call it. Basically, the truck can help bounce itself back in the lane. But if you lift that truck and, it had a bunch of rake to it and the cameras were looking in a specific area, and now all of a sudden you leveled or lifted the truck, now that camera's looking up higher than it should be. And so you need to get your local Ford dealership to do an IPMA camera realignment. The good news is TC Customs does that automatically on every single truck that we lift. So shameless plug, if you're wanting to get one of these and do it turnkey, I don't want to think about it, this is what I want, call us. The phone number's right there on the screen. But if you don't do business with us, that's completely fine. We don't care. Just make sure you get your IPMA camera realignment done. Otherwise, you run the risk of the vehicle not being able to stop automatically for you because it never actually saw that pedestrian, or it never actually saw that vehicle slam on the brakes in front of you. Yes, even base models have that feature. So it's something you need to be aware of. And the last one is going to kind of sound crazy and it's going to sound small, but readjust your headlights. Don't be that guy where the headlights are blinding everybody in front of you. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't already done so, make sure you're subscribed to that channel with the bell notification turned on so you don't miss a single video. And check out tccustoms.com for lift kits just like this one. Peace.